The delay on this video is brought to you by the Hyundai Motor Company. For more information, check out these lawsuits. Hell of Thrones. No? Does that... Hell of Thrones. Sorry, usually the thing, Welcome back, Cotter. Game of Thrones. Hi, I'm Claw Billie, and look at my hair. Today is June 29th, 2021. Back in October of 2020, I watched all of Game of Thrones in a week for $1,000 to pay my rent in the middle of the COVID-19 pandemic. Over the next 9 months, I painstakingly edited a documentary of me watching every single episode, and I have finally completed that goal. So why am I talking to you right now? It's because in the 9 months I spent editing the show, I discovered I still don't understand a damn thing about Game of Thrones. So I'm making an after show for my YouTube show where I binged a show 9 months ago. You're getting all the weird musings and trivia and confusion that was swirling around me for the last 9 months. I'm gonna share it all here. Well, not here in my room, because I don't want to be in my room anymore, because I can go outside now, because I got vaccinated. So guess what? Let's take this show on the road. Oh, it's usually where you do a jump cut to... I think I saw my grandpa. Oh, God. Oh. What the hell? Oh. Okay. 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 I'm not doing the snap trick anymore. Oh. Oh. Like I was saying, we're gonna take the show on the road, but I'm gonna walk or drive. Where am I? Did I achieve second tier YouTuber status? Where we get hotel rooms and stuff? What's this? Hey, 1 second. This feels like level... My tongue feels like sausage. Anyway, let's talk about all the stuff that came up during editing Hell of Thrones. Let's do that now in no particular order. Spoiler alert, you should have seen all of Game of Thrones before you watch this. I'm gonna spoil everything. Also, I'm not setting a timer on anything I say, so some segments could go long, and then I'll put them together in a fun order, and it's gonna be great. Let's go! One of the very first things I did when I finished Game of Thrones was run to YouTube to watch all the comedy sketches that I had been avoiding for a decade. And the very first one I watched was Lindsay Ellis's Dragon Lady Bad. And I got a few minutes into it, and she started to recap what had happened on the show leading up to season 8. And I didn't know most of it. Like, so much of it I couldn't follow. And I had to stop right then and there. Because I realized, even watching the show, I had no idea what was going on.
So that's why I'm bringing you this after show, to tell you all the things I figured out in the editing process rather than the watching process. I'm standing at one of the filming locations for the most iconic time travel film of the 1980s. Time Chasers. Look, I'm a YouTuber from New England who was unemployed in a pandemic. I don't have that Hill Valley, California money, okay? This is the alleyway that served as a bleak vision of the year 2041, which I just realized is only 20 years away, and now I'm sad and old. Anyway, I thought this would be the perfect place to talk to you about time travel in Game of Thrones. So I'm going to level with you. In the episode of Hell of Thrones where I had Viagra Falls join me to watch The Door, I didn't know The Door was going to be a time travel episode. So the version you got with Viagra Falls was me politely trying not to swamp her with time travel talk. But if I was alone, the version I would have done is, oh my god, time travel. Let me tell you all about time travel. I'm obsessed with time travel. I wouldn't own this shirt and be standing here if I weren't. So I've explained before that there are primarily 3 types of time travel. There are others, it's wibbly-wobbly, timey-wimey. But they are mutable, you can change the past. Immutable, you cannot change the past. What you did in the past already happened. And alternate, where it doesn't really matter, who cares, it's a different timeline. The Door is the episode of Game of Thrones that cemented that it operates on immutable time travel rules. Hodor is named Hodor because, I don't know, he got his brain scrambled while somebody was yelling, hold the door. And he started shouting Hodor, so people started calling him Hodor. If this was a mutable timeline, his name would have been Jimmy. And then after Bran changed things, suddenly his name would be Hodor. In an alternate timeline, who cares? Those are boring. Usually when you establish one kind of timeline, you stick with that for the rest of the story. Unless, I don't know, you establish you can change it, magic, science, whatever. So that means that if Bran's time travel is immutable, this is amazing potential to set up all kinds of details about the world of Westeros that were actually set up by Bran. Which is why it's super disappointing that they don't do anything with that. Why is The Door the last episode where time travel is relevant? Bran probably still peeks through time, but he doesn't affect anything. Like, that really was the show's opportunity to show Bran bouncing around in the past and setting all kinds of things the way they are. The thing about immutable stories is they usually go one of 2 ways. One, oh wow, we were saved by ourselves. I think the 3rd Harry Potter does that, where like you find out that like, oh, we actually helped ourselves. That's usually one way that immutable timelines go. The other way is, oh no, we doomed ourselves in the past. We made everything worse. Game of Thrones probably won't do a hopeful thing. It's a very nihilistic show. Doesn't make sense. So okay, let's show how we doomed ourselves. Let's do the really depressing downer ending. Oh, we're not going to do that either. Like everything with Game of Thrones, we're going to be tonally muddy and split it down the middle. So how am I supposed to feel about the events of The Door? Bran used Hodor. He used him. Are we supposed to be like, oh, their heartwarming friendship was always linked from the beginning? He scrambled up his friggin' brain, made him carry him around a bunch, and then die via zombie. Okay. So, is that an example of a mistake? Are we supposed to be heartwarmed by the fact that their friendship travels across time? Like, I don't know how to feel. I never know how to feel on this show. And honestly, like, it was surprising to be like, oh, he got his name via time travel. That's interesting. But, okay. I mean, it has an element of interest, but tonally, I don't know. Like all of the stories on this show, they just don't feel complete because they don't focus enough on character and tone. And again, maybe the books do it better, but the show I saw did not really give me a window into what the hell I'm supposed to feel. To a cooler place, hopefully. Temperature-wise, not. I think this place is really cool. That's a cool dumpster. It's a time dumpster. I'm gonna hate myself if I don't correct this. Time Chasers was not released in the 1980s. It was shot in the summer of 1990, right on the cusp, possibly 1991 depending on the source. It was released on 12 screens in 1993 and then officially released in 1994. But if you watch the movie, it was conceived in the 80s. It was absolutely conceived in the 80s. Still, I don't want anyone getting in the comments Also, it's raining now. There's only two kinds of weather in Rutland, Vermont. Extreme sun and extreme rain. Come try a maple creamy. Something that really baffles me about Game of Thrones is the unpredictability is a selling point. You never know what's going to happen on Game of Thrones. They killed that guy. That battle plan didn't work. Oh, I love that this throws away conventional story structure. To that I say, well, you hated the ending, so maybe you wanted some of those third act payoffs you never got throughout the entire show. Why all of a sudden now, ooh, I liked the nihilism until the ending was a big mess of nothing. Now I'm sad. Isn't that unpredictability you love about this show? Who would have known that a dragon would set a chair on fire? This is going to sound like a weird brag, but I knew that Game of Thrones was going to end badly from the title. I'm not kidding. Break it down. Game of Thrones. Game, competition, sport. Okay, what makes a sport exciting? Number one, the unpredictability. Number two, rooting for a team. You get to pick the character that you want to get the ultimate trophy, the throne. Here's the problem, though. The show has so many characters, so people are rooting for so many different teams. So, inevitably, the vast majority of them are going to be disappointed by whoever wins the throne. Not exactly a home run from a writing standpoint, huh? All right, it's time to talk about world building. To me, world building needs to be the seasoning, not the meat. And I feel like when I'm not engaged with a story in a fictional fantasy sci-fi setting, it's because they're trying to pass off the world building as the meat. And as you can probably guess, I'm about to say that I think Game of Thrones passes off the world building as the meat. Now, if you're going to be focused on world building, there are lots of properties that are. You still need a mythic, Joseph Campbellian, super tight story structure. Star Wars has it. Lord of the Rings has it. Like, if you're gonna do all this world-building stuff, you just need the most streamlined story imaginable, and that is not what Game of Thrones is. It's got all this wacky world-building on top of this messy, complicated plot, like 14 storylines going at once, and they both get in each other's way. Like, if you're gonna do one, you have to do the other. You need both that tight story and that really expansive world where all kinds of cool stuff is happening that we don't ever get to see. Now, I think it's worth noting that I'm not much of a gamer. This might seem like a topic jump, but stay with me. I feel like a lot of games sell themselves on this massive world that you get to explore, but the key there is you get to explore it. And I think that's what the problem is for me, is Game of Thrones feels like a video game where I don't ever get to hold the controller. And now that I say this, I might actually play a Game of Thrones video game. But alas, it is a television program. One that has thrived in an age where games are really, really popular. So there may be something to that. Maybe this is the kind of show that gamers want to see. I don't know. I feel like I can't speak for them. I don't really play a lot of games, except for Grand Theft Auto. One thing I'm not proud of is that a lot of the criticisms that I lob at Game of Thrones are also applicable to my favorite video game, Grand Theft Auto 5. It's very nihilistic. It shows you a crap world where everybody is hungry for power and achieves it through violence. It's deliberately designed to be nihilistic and make you hate it. Frankly, I think it's much more subtle than Game of Thrones. Like, honestly, like, so many areas of the map in GTA are just made to make you hate the world in just like small ways that just kind of like chip away at your psyche. It's honestly very masterfully done. But you know, if you ask me would I want to live in that world? No, of course I wouldn't. But yet when someone says, well, yeah, I like Game of Thrones, but I don't want to live in that world, I go, then what's the appeal of watching it? But like, I get it. Like, you want to see this world destroyed. Like, you came to see a mess. And sometimes it's fun to just see a mess and every character be terrible. I will say this, though. Again, If Game of Thrones was a video game, I might like it. A sandbox video game, it could work. In GTA, I'm actually not super violent. I mostly do stunts and try to stack vehicles weird, or like do heist missions with my friends, which I'm not really into the violence so much as like solving the puzzle of how to pull off the heist. Like that's what really appeals to me. So I don't necessarily play GTA in the same way that scratches the Thrones itch, but I feel like a lot of people do. Like, I'd say they're both, you know, very angsty, nihilistic, violent bro worlds. I just like it because it's a place I can hang with my friends. Now, I don't want it to sound like I'm a prude when it comes to violent entertainment. You know what I really love? Horror movies. And that's actually why I think it's hard for me to get into Game of Thrones, because people talk about how the violence is so shocking and gritty, but like if you compare it to most horror movies, not really. It's actually kind of mild compared to it. And I think that's why I can't get into it. Also, when you're watching a horror movie, it's usually commenting on the violence. It's, you know, either analyzing it as you know, a facet of humanity, a study of it. And other times it's more like a Bugs Bunny cartoon where they're just trying to go for the most creative kills. And I feel like Game of Thrones doesn't really hit either of those sides of exploring violence in media. So, yeah, it's got a lot of stabbing and chopping, but compared to horror movies, it's more like Tame of Thrones. I've never really been a fan of history. It's always been my worst subject, and whenever I read it, I just get kind of bored. And I think that's relevant to Game of Thrones, because what is Game of Thrones but a false history? And what bugs me about history is it's not really cut and dry. Like, you weren't there. You don't know who had indigestion that day. You only have journals and things to go off of. I know it sounds like I'm going on a tangent, but like, we often clean up history, and I don't just mean that, like, you know, the winners get to write the books, though that is certainly true, but, like, also, you know, think of any biopic you've ever seen. They can't just say, well, actually, he fell in love with 4 ladies, because that's not as good a narrative as he found his one true love. I mean, that's the problem in everything from Walk the Line to Hamilton. Like, they have to over-dramatize things. A lot of stories have that beginning, middle, end structure, setup, payoff, and history doesn't have that. And by the way, I'm not faulting history for that. I'm just saying in terms of holding my interest, it doesn't. It feels like a lot of facts and figures to memorize. I will say some historical things have like found my in. Like, I really feel like there's a big industry for like history for people who hate history, like finding ways to make it interesting to them. But back on topic, Game of Thrones is kind of structured like history. There are no clear heroes and villains. Everybody does a little good, everybody does a little bad. Everybody makes plans and sometimes they screw up. Everybody thinks they know what's right, or everybody thinks they know what they want and they don't care what's right. It's just a big old mess, and it's the same as the problem with history. I will throw this out there. My favorite history stories are always inventions. And I don't know if that's the same reason that, like, I tend to like sci-fi, which looks forward, versus fantasy, which looks backward. And I don't mean one's positive, one's negative. I mean, like, oftentimes sci-fi is about finding hope or darkness in where humanity is going. And fantasy is often about finding hope or darkness in where humanity has been. So naturally, fantasy is more history-focused, and science fiction is more home ec focused? I feel like there's a clue in the name. So I think that's another factor in why Thrones doesn't do it for me. It's a lot of just stuff happening in a very messy way. And when I sit down to enjoy some entertainment, I like them to sand it off and clean it up a little bit and like, you know, really work hard to tell me the most satisfying narrative possible. And I don't think that's what that's about. So in summation, real history fails to hold my interest. So fake history has an even slimmer chance, and I think that's what's going on with Game of Thrones, because at the end of the day, I often just worry about taking up brain space with it. Like, learning real history should be a bigger priority for me. I've picked up some Howard Zinn. I'll crack it open. And by the way, I'm at a very historic site right now. This is the Hubbardton Battlefield, which is where part of Time Chasers was filmed. You want to know the weirdest thing I discovered making this project? Emilia Clarke and Seth MacFarlane used to date. Isn't it? What? While I was editing, I would have Family Guy on in the background, and they did some joke about, like, Cinemax boob dragons or something, and I was like, oh, Game of Thrones reference, which I get now. Well, I got it before. I knew the show had a lot of dragons and boobs. But anyway, I type into Google, Family Guy, Game of Thrones, Seth MacFarlane, Game of Thrones, and that's when I discover Seth MacFarlane, of all people, dated Emilia Clarke, the mother of dragons. And it just baffles me. How did they meet? What do they have in common? They only dated for like a year, and there's kind of a age gap, and I don't want to think about any of it, but it's a thing I learned while I made this show, so there you go. Is Game of Thrones the television equivalent of Cards Against Humanity? I've played a few rounds in 2014, and I get it, like, oh, this is the space where it's okay to be taboo. We're all well-meaning people, and we're gonna throw away a couple of the cards, but, like, you know, it's okay to be bad here. I feel like that's what Game of Thrones invites. Furthering the metaphor, a lot of people play with, like, trump cards. As an example, let's say, getting fist-fucked by Bigfoot. I've heard multiple groups of friends say, oh, the getting fist-fucked by Bigfoot card always wins. Then what's the point of the setup at all? What's the point of the structure of the joke? That feels like Game of Thrones. It has a lot of taboo stuff that you like, but it doesn't really matter if it comes together in a satisfying narrative. So some people thought that I was trolling when I said that I genuinely enjoyed a lot of Season 7 of Game of Thrones. And I get it. I understand. It's a dip in writing quality from what has come before. If you like what has come before. But if you don't, all that goofy stuff is just awesome. But it came to me while I was editing the show, a little thought experiment. I want you right now to close your eyes and think of a TV show that you never want to watch. Think of the number one TV show that you never want to watch. Do you see it in your mind's eye? What if somebody told you that in one of the later seasons, with no explanation, an elephant slowly backs into frame and takes a gigantic shit on the main character? Then in the very next scene, in a different location, another elephant backs into the frame and takes a ripper of a duke on one of the other characters. This happens over and over again for the entire episode until every main character in the cast is completely covered in an elephant's butt butter. Now tell me that's not your favorite season of that show. While I was working on my show, it suddenly hit me. I waited so long to watch Game of Thrones that some of the first people who asked me to watch it, I don't even know where they live anymore. Well, I watched it. One thing that's always bugged me is when I'm confused by the plot of a movie or a television show, someone will tell me all the info was there. Great, congrats, I'm glad you crammed it in there. Was it a throwaway line that's easy to miss? Or did you make it, I don't know, fit the medium? Is it visually engaging? Is it audibly engaging? That's the medium, so that's what you have to do. This has been the great challenge of cinema since its inception. A novel can explain things in words. A film or a TV show cannot. Let me do a little thought experiment. Let's say you go down to your local movie theater, which hopefully is still open after the pandemic, and you're all nestled in to watch a mega action blockbuster. And the first frame is literally words on a page. It is the actual script of the movie. You are reading page 1 of the script. You might think, oh, this is kind of experimental. I wonder where they're going with this. 60 seconds later, a hand turns the page. 2. page 3, page 4, page 5. You sit through that all the way to page 120, though in this day and age, probably closer to page 190. Would you say you have just watched a good movie? You may have read a good script. You didn't watch a good movie. That's how Game of Thrones feels sometimes. This is a true story. At one point while I was editing Hell of Thrones, I was chopping up something about some king who didn't really matter. It was a lineage history thing, blah, 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 blah. I never care. And I was like, well, we never got to see this king on screen. I was wrong. Whoever this damn king is, they got him in the show. He's in one of Bran's flashbacks for less than a second. I didn't count the frames, but it's just, bah, there he is. We got him in there. Is that all the info was there? People are telling me about? We put him in for less than a second. There you go. Shut the fuck up. I don't believe it. They cast a guy. They put him in a shiny hat and a dumpy robe, and they made him sit on a spiky chair and go, ah! What the fuck? I've never trusted thrones, and I never will. I can never forgive them for the death of my Trek. What's interesting about Game of Thrones is that before I ever watched it, I didn't even like it because of its influence on the rest of television. And one of those television shows I'd like to talk about is Star Trek Discovery. It's a new renaissance for the Trek era. There hadn't been anything for a while. Star Trek Beyond was good, but, they didn't make anything after it, so there was a bit of a gap. And then suddenly, along comes Discovery. And I was so excited to have a new Star Trek TV show. But let me tell you, if you've never seen it and you don't know anything about it, it is blatantly Trek of Thrones. Star Trek Discovery's aping of Game of Thrones is two-pronged. The first is explicit content. Minor trigger warning. I won't describe anything in detail, but there is graphic rape and torture with full nudity and a bunch of F-bombs. Well, actually, just 2. And again, they walk all that stuff back. Like, once Trek fans are like, that's not really what we like in our Trek, they walk that back. But it is a blatant attempt to cash in on Game of Thrones being this, hyper-adult thing. The second prong is big, sprawling stories that go nowhere. And I'll say this, they go more places than Game of Thrones. I think Game of Thrones revels in true nihilism. I think Discovery revels in keeping you watching. Because here's the thing, Star Trek is all about the nice, tight plot line that wraps up in 45 minutes with the occasional awesome two-parter, best of both worlds. Anyway, I can't put my finger on this kind of writing. I don't know where television went so broken. I'm not against long storytelling, but you gotta have a map. And Star Trek Discovery just feels like stuff happening until we're tired of it, and then new stuff will happen. Characters are wildly inconsistent. The funny thing is that, you know how I only like a couple of Game of Thrones episodes because they're really tightly self-contained and tell a good beginning, middle, end story? Star Trek Discovery is the same way. There's a great mud episode, 45 minutes, there's a time loop going on, what do we do? And there's also a really cool one about the Prime Directive, where it's like, ooh, what are the ethics of the Prime Directive if they are from Earth? Cool stuff. Those are my favorite episodes of Discovery, but everything else is just like, let's set up a mystery and take a whole friggin' season to resolve it. Oh, I guess spoilers for Discovery if you care. Skip here if you don't want Discovery spoilers. Discovery does these season-long arcs that aren't that interesting. There's something called The Burn. There's a whole season about the Mirror Universe. There's a whole season where they accidentally get flung 1,000 years into the future. And it all just feels like stuff they're doing to keep changing things up. I've never seen a show so inconsistent with its tone. And it reminds me of Game of Thrones so much because I don't get the tone of that either. It's just, okay, here's the battle we're focusing on. How did that go? But at the end of the day, who cares? Nihilism. You never know what'll fuck up your plans. Blurp, blurp, blurp. Now, I want to be fair. Is the decline in Star Trek Game of Thrones' fault? No. Nobody from the production of Game of Thrones went over to Paramount and was like, hey, you should make your show more like ours. No, nobody did that. However, the popularity of Game of Thrones, inexplicable though it may be to me, has affected all of television. Not to switch sides here, but Star Wars, The Mandalorian, they said, was based on Game of Thrones too. Everybody's trying to do a Thrones, but now I think everybody's going to try to walk back their Thronesing because it was so disappointing to people. Because guess what? When you bill a show on it just keeps going and going and going, you're gonna fail the ending. And the funny thing is like, I don't even think of Star Trek as having endings, so to speak. Like, yes, lore changes and, you know, it is its own sort of false history. But like, it's usually just about the story of one episode. Now, Star Trek is no stranger to doing season-long arcs. Deep Space Nine famously has some. Picard, which when they announced that show, I was like, no, not season-long arcs. They actually did a pretty good one. I liked it. I'm excited for season 2. Do you want to know what my favorite Trek show is right now? Lower Decks, which is the first sitcom set in the Star Trek universe, and you'll never believe this, but that tight story structure, A-plot, B-plot, beginning, middle, end. Ooh, sitcoms and Star Trek go together so well. It's a really good show. Anyway, in conclusion, I hope the future of television is not Thrones style. When I was editing Hell of Thrones, I did a lot of listening to the Pod Directive, the official Star Trek podcast hosted by Tony Newsom and Paul F. Tompkins. And on that show, they had an episode where they discussed what makes it difficult for people to get into Trek brand new. Like, if you've never seen any Star Trek, what makes it hard to stick with it? And the general consensus was the technobabble. All those little technical science details that get checked by a team of scientists, but for story purposes are basically just magic. And that stuff can, like, really be difficult to follow if you're brand new to the show. And at one point, Paul F. Tompkins posited that the fantasy equivalent of that is lineages. And I was like, okay, PFT, slow down. First of all, wouldn't it be magic? Like, you feel like the science in science fiction, the magic in fantasy, don't those go hand in hand? But the more I thought about it, no, Paul's right on the money. Like, the thing that makes it hard for me to enjoy fantasy is not the magic. Magic's fun. Like, it's a hoot. But, like, when my eyes are glazing over on Game of Thrones, it's because they're talking about families and houses and clans. That stuff I don't care about. But the magic, what little we saw, was fun. I think that's why I like season 7 and 8 so much, because they started upping the magic. Game of Thrones kind of presents itself as a show that's too cool for magic, in which case, I'm just watching dusty old history. Like, again, it's just fake history. And I couldn't pay attention to any of it. Like, I still don't know how Dany and Jon are related. I didn't look on the wiki. I still haven't done that. But just from rewatching the episodes for editing purposes, I don't know how they're related. Wait a minute. How did a bunch of people in different kingdoms that are miles apart all decide to start wearing black at the same time? Also, what's the point of a nighttime battle where you send your soldiers in on foot or on horseback, but then you also do an aerial assault with a dragon? How does it know who's the enemy in the dark? Wait, the Hound is the guy that says yarp in Hot Fuzz? I was editing season 8 when I figured that out. Want to hear some jokes? Okay, here are some jokes from Hell of Thrones that you may have missed. I hid Waldo in an episode. Nope, not going to tell you where he is. I digitally added a Starbucks cup to the background of a single shot. Nope, not going to tell you where that is either. The picture of my dragon mommy Grace changes every season. There is never an image of George R.R. Martin or the Game of Thrones showrunners D&D throughout the entire series. I hastily photoshopped sunglasses onto one Game of Thrones character per episode of Hell of Thrones. The Star Trek alarm breaks because Badgie, a character who is both from Star Trek and a sitcom, has corrupted the system because I went from talking about Star Trek to sitcoms. Did everyone catch that? Is everyone on board for that one? That's a really obscure joke I don't expect anyone to get. Also, the Star Trek alarm stays broken once Badgie infects it. Never works again the entire series. And finally, brace yourself for this one. Every single fake show that I made up throughout the entire run of the show has a specific time slot it's in. If you write down every single one of them, it creates a full day of television programming. I'm not going to show you right now because it'll give you something to do. Hey, did you know that the Blackwater episode of Game of Thrones is even cooler in the books? I have no way of proving this, and also spoiler alert for A Song of Ice and Fire if you haven't read it and want to, but apparently Tyrion's plan is even more complex and an even more amazing payoff. This is all according to a friend of mine, but apparently he put chains in the harbor to stop their boats or fuck up their boats or something. I don't know, but that makes me want to read it. I should confess that of all the reasons people have told me Game of Thrones is great, there is only one that I sort of kind of understand a teeny little bit. A friend told me that because the world of Game of Thrones is so horrible, it's easy to not get as absorbed in it. And when you return to the real world, you get to take comfort in the fact that your life is not that bad. I sort of see that. See, I enjoy movies and TV shows about crappy worlds. Like, you've got Blade Runner and Mad Max and RoboCop, but there's either an element of satire or a glimmer of hope, just a little something to hold on to. Like, things are bad, but one person has the key to fix it all. Whereas Game of Thrones doesn't have that element, and I can sort of see that element is putting the book down, or I guess in this case turning the TV show off. I still haven't read the books, that's not happening. But I can sort of see that argument. That's just not the kind of choices that I make. Outside of some Twilight Zones that have a bleak twist ending, I'm more about the twist than the bleakness. I don't know. I mean, I think we're really down to personal preference here, but at the very least, on some teeny level, I sort of get someone's argument for enjoying this show. Because it sure ain't the writing. Is Game of Thrones the TV equivalent of sad music? I don't really listen to sad music that much. It kind of just keeps me sad. It doesn't really help me. It's not what I like to feel in my music. So maybe that's what Game of Thrones is. The same feeling. Like a medium, a show, a piece of art that is supposed to depress you. And I guess I don't like that, which is interesting because I like different emotions from different art forms, but I don't know. I don't want TV to make me depressed. I don't know. A movie can make me depressed because it's over a couple hours later. A song, I just don't like when it makes me sad. And I guess I don't like when TV makes me sad either. I don't want to be sad for 45 minutes every week. But, to each their own. Rock on. The film Uncut Gems has been praised as a masterpiece of tension. But it's been pointed out that if you're not rooting for the protagonist, it's kind of boring. He's a jerk. Why do you want him to win? Is Game of Thrones an 80-hour Uncut Gems? I think it might be. I don't really care about any of the characters. I'm not rooting for any of them. They're just terrible people. What's in it for me? Why am I excited? By the way, it's impossible to film in a jewelry shop. The rest of these segments I have no excuse for. have a friend who can't watch the American version of The Office because Michael Scott as a character stresses them out too much. And to be honest, I get it. I think the show is very funny. I think they would enjoy watching it, but I understand that if the characters remind you of something you don't like about the real world, you can't get into a show. That's how I feel about Game of Thrones. Everyone is terrible and everything is garbage, and I get enough nihilism in our actual nihilistic world, so hanging out in the world of Game of Thrones stresses me out. Did you know Game of Thrones was going to have more rape? That would have been a terrible decision. I'm glad they didn't do it. It's been said that Game of Thrones is the last monocultural water cooler event television. And to that I say, good. If this is what we're down to as a show that everyone is talking about, it has to be the most cynical, nihilistic, violent thing we've ever made. If that's what it takes to get everybody talking about it, I don't think we need monocultural television events anymore. I think I'm good. I don't think I need to be around the water cooler talking about TV. And we can talk about the merits of television being structured like that. I mean, do we all need to be watching the same stuff? Our media has kind of become splintered to people's individual tastes, and I don't think there's anything wrong with that. Like, TV ain't church. Throughout making the show, I've made fun of Game of Thrones. I've made fun of the people that made Game of Thrones, and I've made fun of people that like Game of Thrones. But I've always tried to keep the tone light. I never wanted to get, like, really mean. But I feel like I should warn you that this segment is going to be mean. This is the mean one. So if you're not in a headspace for me to be mean about Game of Thrones, feel free to skip ahead. There's a time code. I'll wait for everybody to leave the room. All right. So David Mitchell, who I quote a lot, has a bit where he talks about people's literary tastes versus their culinary tastes. And he talks about how if somebody likes a food that you don't like, you're just like, whatever, that's how you're wired. It's a biological thing. But if someone likes a book that you don't like, suddenly you're like, they're wrong. They're definitely wrong. They have terrible taste. But he goes on to talk about how secretly he thinks you have terrible taste for both. Like, he's got that logic brain that understands that, no, some people are just different. But then he's got that, that lizard brain, the thing that makes you make snap judgments, that makes you say, no, they suck for both reasons. They suck because they like this food, and they suck because they like this book. And that's kind of where I'm at, is Game of Thrones seems so obviously bad. How could anyone possibly enjoy it? And it takes me beyond logic. It takes me to that primal, just like, anyone who's different is bad. And I don't know what to do with this feeling. And sometimes it really rears its ugly head. And I'm just like, no, who likes this? Nobody can possibly like this. It's got to be a joke. Everybody's got to be in on it. Everybody behind my back is snickering. We're going to pretend a terrible show is great. It feels like a Doctor Who episode. Like modern Doctor Who, like every third episode is about like something's popular and it's bad for you. Like it was made by aliens and it's going to mind control you. I think Game of Thrones is mind control. Don't trust it. It's an obviously bad show that you never should have started. You should have seen it coming a mile away. Get out of there. We're going to be invaded. That wasn't that mean, was it? You're fine. You're all right. You probably like some good stuff too. Anyway, yeah. I don't believe you like the show. Deep down, I don't believe it. But I know you do. You're cool. Get out of here, you knuckle knob. Do you have any interest in watching Game of Thrones? What about reading the books? Have you had anything spoiled? Yes, that shocked me too. When do you think The Winds of Winter will be finished? I agree, it is nap time. Thank you so much. Hey, you know those predictions I was making the whole time? Turns out I actually got some stuff right. In Season 3, Episode 4, I called that Dany was probably going to turn evil. But it's interesting, at this time, she's like, "You're free. Will you fight for me as free men?" And they're like, "Yeah." And I'm like, okay. Are they trying to subtextually be like, yeah, someone who's fighting for freedom isn't, there's always something in it for them? Like, they foreshadowed pretty well that all the power was going to her head. Even though people claim that came out of nowhere at the end of the show. Whatevs, I caught it. I also predicted that Craster's Keep would burn down. They burned down the incest cabin? I don't know. And by that I mean I thought that Craster's Keep burned down. And it hadn't in the episode that I thought that, but then later it did burn down. So fuck it, count it. Maybe they just foreshadowed it really well. There was a shot where like they were really focusing on the fire in the walls. I don't know. It was weird. Oh, also I called that Tywin would get killed by one of his kids. I feel like they're setting Tywin up to be killed by one of his own children. So count it again. That's 3 times I figured out this show. For those of you who get super excited when I have a compliment for Game of Thrones, this segment is for you. When I was rewatching episodes to get clips and put my edit together and figure out what goes where, I found myself just stopping and enjoying the episode The Lion and the Rose. It's true. I was just loving it. I'd get like 4 minutes into a segment before I realized, oh, I was just here to get screenshots, but I'm just watching this and enjoying it. So there you go. It all kind of clicked for me. Blackwater is a great action episode, and Lion and the Rose is a great character episode, and I had to rewatch it to realize that. Somebody once binged all of The Simpsons and came to the conclusion that it doesn't form a very coherent narrative. And a lot of people responded to that with, yeah, no shit. It's an episodic comedy. Each episode is supposed to be its own little story, and then we check in with those characters again next week. It wasn't designed to tell some grand story across 30-plus seasons. However, some people also argue that Game of Thrones can't be binged. It can, and it's awful. I'm living proof. But some people claim you need that week in between episodes to digest what you've seen. You need to pour it over with your friends and go on Reddit and swap a bunch of theories that'll never get paid off. And I hear that argument, and it's part of the grift. Honestly, it's part of the grift. They just want you to keep watching, and so they want you to think that each one is this finely prepared course, and had all together, it's a sumptuous meal. There ain't no dessert, folks. So I have a confession to make. When I first saw the TV show Rick and Morty, I loved it and I wanted all my friends to watch it. But I feel like elements of it were kind of a hard sell to some friends, so I kind of played up the Game of Thronesier elements of it. And by that I mean long arcs where you have to tune in next season to see what's going on. And I really felt like me and Dan Harmon were kindred spirits on this, and we knew that that was just a ploy to get people to watch it. But now we've finished season 5. Now, when I edited Hell of Thrones, we only had 4 seasons, but season 5 really seems to be leaning into Evil Morty. And I read interviews that said that they're going to try to get more into long plot arc things. And I don't want that. I really wanted to say the stink of Game of Thrones hasn't affected all of my favorite TV shows, but I feel like it's on Rick and Morty too. Wubba lubba dub dub. I discovered this well into the Hell of Thrones edit, but did you know that the writers of Game of Thrones, good old D&D, actually admitted that they're really bad at adapting the books. It's true. I found an article where they said that when they cut the pilot episode, nobody could tell that Jaime and Cersei were brother and sister. And they thought it was obvious because they both have blonde hair. I'm not making any of this up. Check it out. Link in the description. I'm not really sure how to work this into the show, but I am a huge fan of the epic rap battles of history, Tolkien versus Martin battle. If you haven't seen it, it's so good. Look it up right now. I know you're already on YouTube. It is phenomenal. I have a hunch the creators themselves are Team Tolkien over Team Martin. I am Team Tolkien over Team Martin, and I'm not even Team Tolkien. Like, full disclosure, I did a project a few years ago where I analyzed Lord of the Rings, and even though I'm not a fan, I will take it so much more than Thrones. I love Lord of the Rings compared to Game of Thrones, and I don't really know what else to say here. Thanks, Peter and Lloyd and everyone else who made that song. It got me through the edit of Hell of Thrones. I don't want to do a cover. It's kind of against comedy code to get a laugh with somebody else's bit. We all know that. We all know that life is full of chance and anarchy, so yes, it's true to life for characters to die randomly, but newsflash, the genre is called fantasy. It's meant to be unrealistic, you myopic manatee. I feel that in my soul. The movie review site Red Letter Media once called Seth MacFarlane's A Million Ways to Die in the West a satire of westerns made by someone whose favorite western is Back to the Future Part 3. That's a quality slam, and I'm gonna steal it, because I think Game of Thrones is a dark medieval adventure made by two guys whose idea of a dark medieval adventure is Monty Python and the Holy Grail. It's true, the showrunners on Game of Thrones, huge Monty Python fans. I found an article about it, there's probably more, and it makes so much sense every so often. Like the crab scene. Now, there's references to Monty Python throughout the show, but the crab scene is them trying to do Monty Python. And they kind of pull it off. If I'm gonna compliment D&D, that's the closest they got to a Monty Python comedy scene. Kind of. Like, it has, like, tension and stakes and, like, absurdity, and, like, the characters are silly, and Onion Knight's really funny. The actor's name escapes me, but, like, he actually has really good, like, very deadpan comic delivery. I love that scene. I know it's in a season nobody likes, but, like, seeing that, I'm like, you're good at that. Do that. Like, they should have done a medieval comedy. Maybe they were played out? I don't know. I've never seen Your Highness. I should probably watch Your Highness. But anyway, there's my compliment, D&D. You kind of sort of get the style of Monty Python. That just wasn't the assignment. So I found this video. I can't remember what I was researching, but it's Maisie Williams who plays Arya Stark, and I totally didn't have to stop for a minute and remember what her character's name was. And she's in a comic book shop giving away Game of Thrones Funko Pops, pretending like she's never seen the show when she's an actor on the show. And at one point she has someone reenact her favorite scene, and she acts out Cersei's horrible walk of shame. And Maisie Williams is all like, oh, I've never seen the show, that sounds horrible.
You're naked?
Totally naked.
That's so sad. Okay, let's do this. Shame.
And I'm throwing rotten vegetables.
Shame. Yeah. Everyone throw stuff at her.
And, like, I don't know, being cute about that kind of stuff is why I think this show just doesn't work. Some of you aren't going to be happy to hear this, but Stranger Things. Stranger Things is a Thrones. It's going to end just as badly. They don't have a plan. They have no idea what they're doing. They're showing you little pieces of things you want to see paid off. There's no larger story. It's not going anywhere. You need to recognize the signs. Now, to Thrones' credit, I think they were genuinely trying to write stuff that would get you hooked. With Stranger Things, I'm going to coin a term here. I think it's a data sprawl. It's this show that's going in every direction because they have your data. They know what you're watching, and they know to take elements of the things that you watch and put them in the show. You watched a bunch of shows about Chicago. You watched a bunch of shows about superheroes. That's why there's an episode about superheroes in Chicago. If you take any educational content from my show, I want you to not fall for the sunk cost fallacy. It's this idea that you've invested time, money, and effort into something, therefore you must keep going. And it's wrong, but so many people feel it. So I want you to know that just because you've watched 7 seasons of something, you've bought a lot of merchandise, you've talked about it with your friends, and it's all you have in common, it doesn't mean you have to keep going. I want you to be okay dropping a show after a season as soon as all the signs are there that it's just a big old mess. I want you to do that for me. And while you're at it, who are you dating? It's been 6 months? I'm currently waiting for my friends at a theater showing No Time to Die, the latest James Bond adventure. They don't have a poster up out front. That sure would have made for a good shot. Anyway, I wanted to talk about James Bond in my Game of Thrones show because I think both share a little bit of DNA in that they're kind of porn. That's kind of where I'm going with this. Like, I just feel like I watch Game of Thrones and I'm like, it's porny, but not just because of sex. There's also like sort of a porn where you get to pretend to be a character and everything's going right for you. Like, I've heard the term pseudo porn, where it's like basically anything that's just trying to get to a primal urge. And in porn, it's typically sex, but it can also be like, you know, craving for power, craving to dominate, craving to win. Like, you know, you could argue that like a sports movie is pseudo porn sometimes. Like, you don't have to go out and play the sport, but you want to get that feeling. You want to feel like you won. And so I think Game of Thrones maybe fits into that category, but I'm gonna actually I'm gonna slag on the thing I like. I think James Bond is the same movie every time. Isn't it great? Like, there are certain things I don't like that. I don't always want an identical Star Wars or an identical Star Trek or an identical superhero movie. But like, James Bond gets to that part of my brain that just wants to see shit blow up and see hot ladies, and that's all I need. Oh, my lighting's driving away. And I feel like Game of Thrones fills that spot too sometimes. Now, I will go on record and say that Game of Thrones probably has a slightly more complicated plot. You do have to listen to people in boardrooms. Wait, what am I saying? Every James Bond has boardroom scenes. It's always, his name is so-and-so, and this is his particular physical attribute that he has a nickname based on. Like, they have those scenes too. So yeah, I feel like Game of Thrones and James Bond are more similar than I give them credit for. James Bond is probably more formulaic, but like, at the end of the day, you do kind of watch Game of Thrones, just the clock ticking down to when somebody's gonna fight and when somebody's gonna fuck. Like, I think they're both fighting fucking art. They have that pulpy, like, you know, men's magazine. I fought off a bear and I impressed 6 women and had sex with all of them. And then I drank 17 martinis and my liver survived, for I am man. Like, they fit into that mold. Not necessarily in the same way, but yeah, it's just James Bond makes me think of Game of Thrones a lot, and how, like, you know, I think James Bond is the closest thing I have to a Game of Thrones. I ain't here for the plot. I know what's gonna happen. Let's go through the motions. Let's just try to find exciting ways to go through the motions. I'm here for cool looking cars. I'm here for beautiful dresses. I'm here for exotic locales. I want a neat gadget or two. I want 5 good fight scenes. Usually get 2, and I want to see something blow up. Like, that's what I'm here for. And I guess there's nothing wrong with wanting that. So I don't judge people for watching Game of Thrones just for the fight fuck ratio. But to me, it's darker, and now I'm getting into talking about James Bond all night. The latest James Bond tries to go sort of gritty, and I don't think it works. There's a camp and a burlesque to Bond. Even Connery Con. Y'all going to Sean Con this year? Even the Sean Connery era has elements of burlesque to it, and also elements of misogyny to it, that, like, I feel like Game of Thrones sometimes gets like a little winky, we're all in on this, but other times it's just brutal and horrifying. And I'm not gonna lie, there's like scenes in Quantum of Solace and Skyfall that I'm like, that's not fun. Like, there's a fun way to present this stuff. So yeah, I didn't go into this with any particular thesis, just James Bond, Game of Thrones. I think they can be friends, and I think there's ways to do what they do that are fun. How can a story dip in quality? I get how writing can dip in quality, the exposition can get worse, the dialogue can get worse, etc., etc. But the actual story itself can't really be judged until its conclusion. So Game of Thrones is just one long story, so how can the quality dip? It's not even a story until it's complete, because it's the kind of show where every single episode ends with 7 plot threads in the air. Almost no episode has an actual beginning, middle, and end, and if it does, it's a good episode. Now, episodic television is a bunch of stories in a row, so I get how that can have a dip in story quality, because the stories themselves can get worse. But I don't think you can say that about Game of Thrones. You have to watch all the way to the end to judge the full quality of the entire story. And you wanted a complete story, and in your heart you felt like you were on the way to a complete story, but they were just taking you for a ride. That would have hit way harder if you could have seen my face. Now, this may not seem immediately relevant, but what show do you think I watched after Game of Thrones? Do you want to take a guess? That's right, I watched Sense8. It's an amazing show. It's by the Wachowski sisters, J. Michael Straczynski. It's on Netflix. Apparently it didn't get enough people watching it until it was too late. And I would also like to throw my hat in the ring for saying, I'm sorry, I should have watched it. It is essentially the anti-Thrones. It's in a bunch of different locations, but the entire production design is focused on making each location feel completely distinct. Now, it's helped by the fact that it takes place in the real world, and I don't want to ruin the plot too much, but it also follows a large cast of characters, and them all coming together despite being so spaced out over the world is part of the plot. It's also not an adaptation as far as I know, so they can do everything from the beginning to make sure that it is a televisual story. And that's a really important part, because when you're adapting something for TV, you need to make sure that it reads on TV. It's a medium shift. You have to do things differently. Thrones doesn't. Sense8 does. Again, it doesn't feel like a fair comparison because one's an adaptation, but still, it just kind of highlights how Thrones could have done a little more work. Like, everything on Sense8, like the editing, the acting, the writing, different characters struggle with the same things at the same time. Often when we change location, there will be a similar action in the edit, like from one to the other. It's like everything supports making it a coherent story that you can follow. There's a beginning and middle end to every episode, but also there's an arc. Full disclosure, I haven't actually finished it. So that definitely taints things. Maybe it ends just as badly as Thrones, I don't know. But for right now, it is the cure to what thrones ya. Check it out. During the course of my editing, I came across a 2014 Rolling Stone interview with George R.R. Martin. And aside from giving weird backhanded compliments to Tolkien and complaining that Star Trek is unrealistic, newsflash, the genre's called fantasy. He goes on to talk about the difficulties of writing for television, and in it he talks about when he took classes to learn how to write for television, it was much more focused on structure and dialogue. Yeah, that's the medium. That's what it is. Like, it's not like a book. You can't get inside a character's head like in a book. You can't leave things up to the interpretation of the reader. Like, TV is a different medium, and when you're going to adapt something, you need to adapt it for said medium. And this is kind of what I've been harping on this whole time. Like, they didn't do enough of a job saying, oh, this is TV. What do we have to do differently? Like, yes, there's more of a focus on dialogue, but you have to like the character saying the dialogue first. You need to find a way to do that. It's a big sprawling narrative that jumps all over the place. Okay, what you need is some tight structure to your writing, to your editing, to your planning, to your formatting, to your costuming. They put in work. I'm not going to say they didn't put in work, but if they put in more, it could have actually functioned like a TV show. I mean, so many people have said that A Song of Ice and Fire is unfilmable. including George R.R. Martin. I should probably stop doing that gag and get a real picture of him in here. Come on in, real George. You've earned it. It's the last episode. We're talking real George here. We're not talking the mimetic version of him. Real George R.R. Martin, who really said this. He hated writing for television because executives make a bunch of dumb decisions that don't really support the story. When he wrote for Beauty and the Beast, they wouldn't let the Beast kill anyone. The whole point is that he's a monster. And I get it. I'm going to give George that one. There are so many stories of executives just not getting the product. I get that. I'm there with him on that. But he also goes on to say that if you made it, it wouldn't work as a movie, which is another thing that I hate, is people are like, oh, well, it won't fit in a movie, so we'll make it a show. A show is structurally different than a movie. It's not just one long movie. There are certain beats you have to hit. You need to have your episode come in a nice nugget, and then you move on to the next nugget. There are ways to adapt stuff. It is doable. What you don't do is just say it's one long movie. Anyway, I don't fault the guy for not fitting the television format. Clearly, whatever he's doing, content-wise, structure-wise, character-wise, it just doesn't work for television. But just because the story in your head doesn't work for television does not give you the right to be mean to television. I love television. Nobody should be famous for this. Nobody should be famous for any of this. For anything like this. It's just watching TV and talking about it. Anyone can do that. That said, there's a show I'm even less interested in than Game of Thrones, and it's The Walking Dead. I will watch the first episode of The Walking Dead for $1. This is real. It's in the description below. If you want to know more about me, here's my website. If you want to give me money, here's my Patreon. And if you like the music, go here, buy some. I made it. And as they say on Game of Thrones, when the white... What the fuck is going on?